Welcome back to Queens of the Damned, a horror podcast. Don't forget to leave us reviews on iTunes or Facebook and follow us on Podbean to be entered into our giveaway. This week, Nikki, Miranda, and I are discussing some of the most notorious spree killers, so happy listening!
Alright, so the spree killer that I chose goes by the title of the Geneva County Massacre. On March 10th, 2009, Michael McLendon went on a killing spree. He was armed with 4 guns and a ton of ammunition. And across 3 communities in the extreme southeast of Alabama, he killed 11 people in about an hour.
Wow.
Which made the tragedy the deadliest attack by a single gunman in Alabama. So, within the victims, 5 of them were his family members, and 2 of them were children. So, it began in Kinston, Alabama at 4 p.m., where he kills his mother execution style. Her name was Lisa White McLendon. She was 52 years old. She was found lying face down with her 3 dogs on top of her, which he also shot and killed. And then he covered her with a pile of clothes, then set the house on fire. He then drove to Samson, Alabama, and shot several family members, including his 74-year-old grandmother, Virginia White, his 55-year-old uncle, James White, his 34-year-old first cousin, Tracy Wise, and his 15-year-old second cousin, Dean Wise. He also killed a neighbor, 31-year-old Andrea Dawn Myers, who was the wife of Geneva County Sheriff's Deputy Josh Myers, who was involved in his pursuit, and their 18-month-old daughter, Corinne Myers. After he left the home, he shot and killed a pedestrian while he was driving. It was 24-year-old James Irvin Starling. He was just walking along the road. Then he stopped at a local gas station and shot and killed 43-year-old Sonja Lolly Smith. And then he drives towards Geneva. He kills 51-year-old Bruce Wilson Malloy, who just drove by him. And while he's driving down the highway, he's just firing at cars as he goes. He fires at a Walmart and at a Piggly Wiggly. And then after a shootout at Reliable Products, which is a plant where he used to work, he shoots and kills himself.
Wow.
So this is another true crime episode.
Yeah.
And
It's a lot.
how's everyone feeling?
Wow.
Yeah. So several people were injured along with the 11 that were killed. One was the 3-month-old daughter of Andrea and Josh Myers, Ella Myers. 50-year-old Jeffrey Nelson, who was just driving in a vehicle along the highway. 49-year-old Greg McCullough at the convenience store. Mike Gillis, who was a state trooper. He was injured by glass when Michael shot at him on the highway. Frankie Lindsay, the Geneva police chief, was shot in the shoulder in front of Walmart. And Ricky Morgan, the Geneva Police Department lieutenant, was injured by flying glass in front of Walmart. Most of the people were just injured by his random spurts of shooting. He wasn't, like, straight up shooting at them. Like, he was just shooting at nothing, and they ended up getting hurt, basically. And then the police find a letter that was written by McLendon in a mailbox near his home, where he states that he wanted revenge on his family for making he and his mother suffer. I don't really know what they were suffering over after all of the research that I did. I have no idea. So he claims that he shot his mother while she was asleep to put her out of her misery, and then planned to kill himself afterwards. He says that his mother was suffering from lung cancer, but the autopsies don't support that at all. In fact, there was no illness found. He also says that he had planned the murders for later on, but he was triggered by his mother being suspended from a poultry plant. She was suspended for a week. She was gonna go back to work.
Weird.
Yeah. So the police believe that what part of it was that he was frustrated by his inability to hold a job. He failed to join the Marine Corps or become a police officer. So he couldn't become a Marine because of fraudulent entry. Basically, he didn't tell them that he had chronic shoulder dislocations, and so he was discharged. And in the discharge letter, the Marine captain wrote that he also didn't appear mentally sharp. He left the police academy because he failed his physical. That was his choice. They didn't even kick him out. He also left a list of employers and coworkers who had wronged him, which included the metals plant that had forced him to resign, and that's where he ultimately killed himself.
Mm-hmm.
Also a sausage factory where he had quit the week before, and the poultry plant which suspended his mother. For a week. God. He, I guess, appeared depressed about job failures, but the police don't believe that that was the precise motive. They think it may have had something to do with it, but not the definitive reason that he did it.
Uh-huh.
They also found a piece of paper with a list of lawyers. He apparently wanted to hire one because he was going to sue family over a family Bible that he believed he should have. But in the end, the police did not settle on a motive. Basically, they just think that it was a combination of his parents' divorce, his failure to start a career, and the failure to qualify for the Marines.
How old was he?
He was 28.
28. Oh.
Mm.
What a baby.
Yeah. Personally, I think exactly what the police settled on was just, it was a combination of everything that was going on in his life. I guess the people who had worked with him, the people who had gone to school with him, pretty much only had nice things to say about him. They labeled him as quiet and hardworking, a team player, a good leader. So to me, it almost sounds like all of this shit was just building up, and he wasn't saying anything about it, and it just exploded.
How come they're always described as quiet?
That is true. But the amount of ammunition and guns that he had in his car probably means that he was going to probably kill a lot of people in, like, the factories that he had worked at and the poultry plant that his mother had worked at. There was definitely an intention to go further with it, but didn't have the opportunity because of the police.
Interesting. And you know, it's so funny,
So
once
much
you
death.
started talking about it, I think I do remember this one. Only
Oh, really?
because he killed so many of his relatives.
Yeah.
Like, I think I remember that story. This sounds kind of familiar.
Mhm. See, and of all the reading that I did, I never fully understood what he meant by, I need to kill them for making my family suffer. Like, over a Bible? Or, like, I feel like there has to be something else. I kept trying to find the actual letter, like, hoping someone had leaked it, but I couldn't find it.
So,
I don't know.
I know that, like, you're more likely to be a victim of a crime if you're mentally ill than you are to commit one like this.
Mhm.
But I feel like there's some, like, sort of element of delusion going on here. Like, did they ever test him? Did they, I mean, obviously, that would be one of the first things you would do, right, is get him evaluated.
Well, but like I said, like, from what everyone said about him, it doesn't really sound like he was that unstable, except for that one police chief that was like, he wasn't mentally sharp. But
Yeah,
it
but that
sounds
doesn't-
like he was a good worker, and I don't know.
Yeah, but, I mean, he shot up 3 counties, so I feel like there was something going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who knows? I mean, I think you certainly see this with, like, some of the school shootings that have happened where people sort of, like, they dismiss the signs. Like, look at, so this
Yeah.
wasn't a school shooting, but look at the guy in the South who shot up the black church, who shot up the Bible study.
Mhm.
And I remember his roommate giving an interview after it happened, and his roommate was like, oh yeah, he kept talking about how he was gonna do that and, like, start some kind of race war, but I thought he was just talking. And, like,
Oh my god.
who just says that? Like, nobody. But I think that the human mind sometimes, and maybe the roommate was a white supremacist too, I don't know.
Mhm.
But sometimes I think that the human mind kind of tries to rationalize things and rationalize people's behavior. So you think, well, you know, you shouldn't judge somebody. You know, maybe he's a little weird, but
Mhm.
he seemed nice. But really,
Or
if
there's
you
no
really
way he'll
thought
ever do
about
that. He's just
Right,
talking,
and if you really
know.
thought about it, I mean, maybe you couldn't picture that he would murder a bunch of people, but that if you really, really, really thought about it, you would realize, there's something kind of off with this person.
I feel like if someone said that, like someone even I thought I knew really well, if someone said something like that, I would tell somebody, like, right away.
Mm-hmm.
Right,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
right away.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But then even then, it doesn't work. I mean, in the shooting in Parkland, hadn't like a whole bunch of people reported that kid for being like threatening violence and all kinds of stuff, and nobody did anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like they were trying to call the FBI and stuff on him, and nobody
Yeah.
even looked into it.
Yep.
Dang.
Ugh, that's too bad. All those people, like a whole
Yeah.
family wiped out. That's so weird.
Yeah.
That's so
it's
weird to
crazy.
think about. Yeah,
God, it always frustrates me when they kill themselves, because I'm just like, I want to know, like, why the
I
fuck
know.
did you do this?
Mhm.
I know. And then I wonder why. Okay, so killing the family, not that I think that's reasonable, but okay, so at least there was a motive. But then
Mhm.
why go on the shooting spree throughout and just shooting random people? It's not even like he went to the poultry plant that
Yeah.
suspended his mom and shot that up. He just like started shooting
Yeah.
people that he never even met.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, it just seemed like he was just fucking pissed off.
Yeah.
And
Probably.
he
That's
just,
probably
I mean, he
it.
just lost it, you know?
Yeah.
I would say he was a little angry.
I think that's fair.
Okay, we
I think
solved
that's
this
a fair
one.
assessment. Oh man,
Good pick. That was just
That was a good one.
ridiculously senseless. Just
Very
like,
senseless
oh my
and
God.
so quick. I mean, to kill all those
Mhm.
people so quickly.
So 11
Yep.
people in 3 counties in an hour?
Yep.
How
Right around
fast
an
was
hour.
he driving?
I know.
Too fast.
Oh my God, I can barely do my grocery shopping in an hour.
I know.
That's probably not a joke I should make. I'm sorry.
It's
in
okay.
hindsight.
Well, keep in mind, he also, like, he shot his mother execution style, killed her 3 dogs, laid them on her body,
What did the fucking dogs
put
do?
clothes on her body, and burned the house down. And then went on the rest of the shooting spree.
Wow.
All in an hour.
And then he had time to go inside a gas station and then outside a Walmart, right? So he had time to park. Do you think he parked like in a space?
No, I don't think he ever left his car. I don't think he even stopped at the gas station. My guess is he got close enough and he shot inside.
Okay.
Okay.
And then as he was driving by a Walmart, he was shooting at the Walmart.
I just had this
Oh my
hilarious
God.
picture of him like carefully putting his truck in a space.
Parking it perfectly, getting out, locking the car.
Is it locked?
God.
Oh God.
I feel like such a bad person.
No,
I'm sorry.
It's okay. That's how you deal with things like this.
I
Yeah.
just don't know how
God.
else to deal
That's
with
how
it.
you deal with things like this.
Oh.
Is just like gallows humor.
Oh fuck,
That's
Miranda.
hilarious.
You ready, Nikki?
I'm like crying and laughing at the same time. Okay, so these are spree murders, but could also possibly be considered serial murders. And we'll get to that later, but I'm just gonna focus on the one case, and it was 2 families in 2 different houses on the same night. So taking you all the way back to Wednesday, September 20th in 1911. A woman named Nettie Ruth goes to visit her sister with her friend, whose name is Anna Merritt, and no one answers the door. So they open it with a spare key, and this is according to the newspaper report from the next day in 1911, which I had a blast reading because those old newspaper reports are so dramatic. But as they open the door with the spare key, Nettie remarks, "Oh, suppose we find May," Alice, who's the mother, her sister, and her babies dead in the house. It would be terrible, terrible. Okay, I wonder if she really said that. But the house smells strongly of decay when they enter, and upon entering the kitchen, they notice that plates from Sunday evening supper are still sitting on the table. And it's Wednesday. In the front bedroom, they see a pile of sheets on the bed and notice great splotches of blood on the wall and see the body of Alice, her niece, lying on the edge of the bed with her skull crushed. So Alice is, I know it's going to get confusing, but the mom's name is Alice and she goes by May, so I'm going to call her Alice May, and the daughter, the oldest daughter, who's like 6 or 7, goes by Alice as well. So this is the body that they saw. So reportedly, these women didn't stick around to see any more, but they left the house screaming, where they ran into 2 men walking past who went into the house to confirm the murders while the women telephoned the police. Like, you would figure they wouldn't have to go in. Like, I would believe them. So when the coroner arrives, the neighbors are gathering, and almost immediately, the neighbors tell the authorities that the family next door, and their last name is the Waynes, has also not been seen since Sunday evening. So then they go into that house next door and they find the 3 Waynes also killed with the blunt end of an axe that Mr. Wayne had recently borrowed from a neighbor to chop wood that was just laying outside. So this axe was left propped up against the back door. So in total, there's 6 dead. From the Wayne household, we have Henry Wayne, the husband and father, Mrs. Blanche Wayne, and their daughter, who's also named Blanche, who was 2 years old. I don't know, there was a thing where the mothers were just naming, hey, my name's a good name. So Blanche was 2 years old. And from the Burnham household, which was the first house where they discovered bodies, Mrs. Alice May Burnham, little Alice, who was 6, and John, who was 3. And during the autopsy, they discovered that Alice May was also pregnant. But where's Mr. Burnham? So he's nowhere to be found. And so, of course, they think that he did it. It's thought that all 6 of the victims were asleep except little Alice Burnham, 6, who woke up and tried to escape. However, she was hit across the head and fell partly across the body of her mother, where she died. So it turns out that Mr. Burnham, he worked at a nearby sanatorium, and he was part of the Modern Women of America. So this sanatorium was where patients with tuberculosis were treated. And the authorities immediately took him into custody, because, it's usually the husband. But he denied his guilt, and they really tried to like him as a suspect, especially in the media, because they were reporting that, he didn't react emotionally enough to when he was told the news, when he was taken to the crime scene after the bodies had been removed, and shown the murder weapon, or when he was taken to the morgue to identify the bodies. So he wasn't reacting at all. And then here's a weird thing that was in the article. When he was shown Alice's body, the 6-year-old, he said, "That isn't my little child. My girl's got lighter hair than that." And spots of blood are found on the shirt he wore that Sunday. But it's actually quickly ascertained that Mr. Burnham isn't really a likely suspect. The authorities quickly used their amazing detective skills to figure out that he was in shock, and that's why he wasn't emotionally reacting, because he just got the news that his whole family had been killed with an axe. And also, so the sanatorium where he worked was 12 miles away, and even the TB patients there remarked how sick he was with tuberculosis. So from the article, inmates say that he is not strong enough to walk from the kitchen to the barn without stopping every few feet to get his breath. So not likely that he did it. The article also claims that he probably wouldn't have been strong enough to actually lift the axe to deliver this attack because it was brutal. Their faces were completely pulverized. And at the sanatorium, he roomed with several other men who provided an alibi for him. They said he was there the whole time. His normal day off was Sunday, but he'd actually had it switched to see his family on Wednesday. So he had seen them the Wednesday previously. And as for the blood that was found on his shirt, he worked in a TB ward. So it could have been a blood from a hemorrhage, either from himself or from one of the patients coughing up blood. Pretty easy to get blood on your shirt that way. So eventually they release Burnham, and they focus on this guy named Tony Donatel, who was kind of a neighbor-ish, and he was rumored to be mentally ill and to have had an affair with Mrs. Burnham. Mr. Burnham gave them the tip that it was Tony, which is really weird because, like, normally you wouldn't listen to your murder suspect about, like, who else could have done it, I guess. Like, they really wanted to like him for this. But I think this truly shows that the police had no idea what was going on or where to look, because they had just nowhere else to go besides the husband, who obviously couldn't have done it. So Burnham attested that he'd once walked in on his wife and Tony Donatell in a questionable attitude, which back then could have really meant anything. Donatell's reply to this was that Alice had hurt herself on a barbed wire fence and that he was examining the wound. In addition, they could have been sitting next to each other and he could have been holding her hand. Like, it could have been that.
I just feel like it just reminds me of that old excuse of, like, no, we weren't doing anything bad. Those noises, we were just moving the furniture. Like, that's just what it reminds me of.
I think because of the reticence of the newspaper article, like, back then, in the sake of propriety, not providing details, like, it just makes me think it could have gone either way. So, that's not it, though. So the neighbors said that he imagined at times that he was being followed by witches and that they had mutilated his property. According to the neighbors, he often scrubbed the outside of his dwellings in places, explaining that he is obliterating the marks left by the witches. So, weird shit going on. I don't know if people are just bored or this is actually happening. This guy needs some help. But this is how easily stuff gets misinterpreted and falsely reported. Not just then, but today. They originally thought that the murderer attempted to torch the house since a curtain was badly singed, but they later found out that a photographer had set it on fire with a flashbulb on accident because there was low lighting in the room. So this is how messed up some things can get and how weirdly construed they can get. So we really don't know if this guy was as wacko as they say. They thought that they would be able to tell whether or not Donatell was the guy by using the Bertillon system, which was what they did before fingerprinting. What they would do is they would really measure, like, parts of the distance from one part of your body to another. So, like, instead of measuring the ridges or looking at the ridges near your fingertips, they would actually measure, like, the length of your fingers and the length and the width of your fingers. So they thought they would be able to solve the murder this way because the murderer had actually knocked over an inkwell in one of the houses when he was crawling through the window, and he left a large fingerprint on the handle of the axe that was used, which is so fucking frustrating. Like, if that was today, that guy would be so fucked. But they had a whole finger, like a handprint. But all the Bertillon system did was prove Donatell's innocence because his fingers weren't those measurements, and no one was ever convicted. So how does this tie into a wider thing? This is where we go down the rabbit hole. So if this is sounding familiar, back in episode 6, I talked about the Villisca axe murders. And it could at once be a mass murder, a spree murder, and part of a larger web of serial killings. So these murders, including the Villisca axe murder, are part of a string of axe murders, approximately 30, that occurred between 1911 and 1912. So I'm just going to run through a list of these places, and I only looked at a few of them because I wanted to pull some statistics together about how similar these crime scenes were. So 5 of the most famous ones are Ellsworth, Kansas. This was October 17th, 1911. So this is after. The first one was the one I just talked to you about. So then Ellsworth, Kansas on October 17th, Monmouth, Illinois on September 30th, 1911, Paola, Kansas, June 5th, 1912, Villisca, Iowa, June 10th, 1912, and the last one was Columbia, Missouri in December of 1912. And so a lot of people speculate whether these things are actually related because the axe is a weapon of convenience at this time. Like, everyone has one in their backyard. And in addition, you're not going to use the sharp end of an axe because, sorry, but if you stick it in someone's head, you're not going to be able to get it out. So you're going to use the blunt end. So the choice of weapon, I guess, isn't really the thing that ties all these murders together. But what does is I took 5 of these murders and compared the MOs. So let me just give you a rundown of how weirdly similar some things were on these murder scenes. So in 3 out of 5 of these, the murder weapon was the blunt end of an axe that belonged to the victims. It was used to pulverize them until they were unrecognizable, and it was left at the crime scene. The other 2 were still bludgeoning murders. One was a coal pick in Powell, Kansas, and one was a pipe in Monmouth, but they're the same thing. Same type of murder, a bludgeoning murder. In all 5 of the cases, the victims' faces were covered with bedsheets or clothing. Either before or after the murder. Sometimes they think it's before because the murderer doesn't want to get the blood on themselves. In all 5 of the cases, also, there was a railroad very close to the scene. In Villisca, mirrors and other glass surfaces were covered. But in Ellsworth, the perpetrator covered an old phone that had anthropomorphic features. It looked like a face, and they thought maybe he felt guilty and didn't want the face looking at him. I'll put up a picture of the phone. It's really creepy. And then in 3 out of the 5 cases, the murders were committed on a Sunday night. The murderer hung around to wash or eat after the murders. And the crimes were suspected to be of a sexual nature. But in the other 2, the murder was committed on a Saturday night or the victims were discovered on a Wednesday. So it could have been either a mistake of writing it down or they're not sure when it actually occurred. And in 4 out of 5 of the cases, the lamp was dimmed in a very specific way by taking the top off and moving the wick aside, either to provide ambiance or privacy for the murderer. So there's definitely some stuff going on here that is very consistent. After this, in 1913, actually, it only took 2 years for an inspector to catch on to this. He kind of liked Henry Lee Moore for all of these crimes. But he's no longer considered a good suspect. Henry Lee Moore was the son of Georgia Moore, who was one of the last victims in Columbia, Missouri. And I don't know why they said they didn't like him, but they said that he was a convicted axe murderer who was released shortly before this string of crimes happened. And they said that it's very unlikely that a serial murderer would return to kill his whole family. Like, that's the last thing he did in 1912 when they stopped. So, like I said, I thought that this was really cool, and I found a few articles about something that hadn't really been connected before. But this book that's really popular, The Man from the Train by Bill James, covers actually a wider string of axe murders from 1898 to 1912. There's actually some that are like racially motivated, they think, so I wasn't sure they were related, so I only did those 2 years, just to show you how weird it is that in 2 years, 30 of those murders happened, and so many of them had similar MOs. But if you want to read The Man from the Train, it kind of postulates that this happened over 25 years instead.
Neat.
So, yeah.
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
Like, I feel like if this were to happen nowadays, like, they would catch the guy right away, but back then, all you had to do was not be there when the cops showed up. Mm-hmm. And then...
I can't believe you managed to connect this episode to an earlier episode.
I can't believe that I ran into that. I never thought... I didn't know Villisca was a part of a wider string of axe murders until now. Mm-hmm. What's sad was this book was on my list to read, like, and I didn't know. I just thought it was about Villisca. I didn't know it was about all of those axe murders. And there's a couple that talk about... I'll post my sources on the blog. But there's a couple that talk about the links between these crimes before I think this book was released. And that's where I got this information from, was like, I looked up spree murders, and then I found Villisca, and then I found this one. And then I was like, what? Villisca? How is this related? And then I just, like, it just went from there. It was so fucking weird. It just brought me back to when we did that episode, because so much of it was so familiar. It was, like, all the same thing.
I wonder who did it.
The worst part is we'll never know.
I know.
Do you think they're... I don't think all of them are related. But I think a lot of them might be.
I think you'd have to read about the specifics of each and every one, because, I mean, I could see where, okay, an axe would be the weapon of the day, because, you know, guns then are not what they are now. And if you wanted to kill someone and have it be quiet.
Exactly, that's perfect. But I tried to find specifics. I had to narrow it down to like 7 or 6 because I think Villisca is for some reason the one that everyone knows, but there's actually so many other ones that are exactly the same. It's usually family, and also robbery is never the motive. Like, they'll have valuables just sitting out, which is also really creepy. And then everyone at the time, the police thought it was jealousy, revenge, something like that, every single one.
Right.
Because they had no way to link between states or anything. Like,
weird. Wow. And yeah, that's so interesting. Now I'm just like really curious to know what the other links are between the cases.
I can't wait to read that book now.
Yeah, what was it called again?
The Man from the Train.
Okay.
Not to be confused with The Girl on the Train.
Yeah.
or
I was
Orphan
a little
Train.
Confused at first. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, and that was the whole thing, is they thought that he got around by the railroad. And that since they were all so close to the railroad.
I remember that from Villisca, thinking, oh, he just hopped a train out of town and that was it.
When they thought it was that Reverend Kelly, because they said that Kelly had gotten on the train before the murders were reported and said there's 6 dead people back in Villisca.
Right.
The cops don't know about it yet, but for some reason they just could never pin it on him, even though he was like a known perv, and he was just like fucking weird.
Yeah.
But then like the old couple who said that he said that recanted, and I don't know. Like, people wanted attention. That was the crime scene where some guy took a piece of bone from the scene and was like, I have a piece of the father's skull here. So, like, you can't trust anything witnesses say.
No. No, weren't people, like, going on tours through the house?
Well, they still are. You can go stay there.
No, I guess I meant, like, in the immediate
aftermath.
like
they're trampling all over that crime scene.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, literally stealing pieces of bone for memorabilia.
I guess they didn't have anything else to do.
No, they didn't. It was similar in this one. Well, and that's funny because they may have not discovered that other family, the 3, if the neighbors hadn't been so nosy, because the neighbors started gathering outside, and then they were like, oh, well, you know what? We haven't seen that family next door. Like, they just moved into town, and we haven't seen them for, like, 5 days. Maybe you should check on them, too, because everybody's in everybody's business.
Weird. What was a good one?
Mm-hmm.
So, I chose obviously not the nation's first spree killer, but kind of the first one that really captured the national media attention, at least that I could find. So I chose Charles Starkweather and his girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate.
Mm-hmm. I almost chose that one. Oh my god, I'm so glad
he is probably the most famous spree killer that the U.S. has had, one of the most famous. So, Charlie Starkweather was born in Lincoln, Nebraska. Extremely poor. He had like 6 or 7 brothers and sisters. So, he was 18 years old at the time of the murders. So, one thing to keep in mind is that this was a different time. And this is in the country. I mean, this is Nebraska. So, these are Hicks. Sorry to anyone from Nebraska. I assume you're not Hicks now, but at the time, these would have been, Hicks. So, when he was 18, he met 13-year-old Carol Ann Fugate via her older sister, who he previously dated. And he and Carol did start seeing each other. So, that's probably, for me, that was like the grossest part.
Did she hurt herself on a barbed wire fence? I'm pretty sure he was just
no,
taking care of her.
So Charlie takes a job at a warehouse to be near Carol's middle school, So that way I guess he can pick her up to hang out or whatever when she's done with school. So he ends up getting fired from that job because, of course, he has a real problem with authority. His manager at the warehouse later says that he thinks he knows best. He thinks he's smarter than everyone else. And you just can't tell him what to do. So when he gets fired, he goes home and he and his father get into a huge fight. And his father basically beats the shit out of him and kicks him out of the house. So, because he now needs a place to live and has to pay his own rent, he ends up taking a job as a garbage man, which he is really looked down on for being a garbage man. You know, people are really making, rude comments as he's picking up their trash. And all this basically does is solidify his worldview that the world is just, a shitty place. And everything is terrible.
Yeah.
So, prior to the spree killings, he does commit a separate murder. So, on November 30th, 1957, he goes to a gas station and he tries to buy a stuffed animal for Carol on credit. And the gas station attendant, Robert Colvert, refuses to sell it to him on credit. He tells him, you have to have the cash. So Charlie returns several times throughout the evening and is buying just small items. And then he finally comes back with a shotgun. He forces Colvert to give him $100 out of the cash register. And then they get into Charlie's car and he drives Colvert to a remote area where they begin to struggle over the gun, and Charlie ends up shooting Colvert in the head. Obviously, he's not caught for this murder. No one even has any idea that he could possibly be involved. And so this makes him feel like he is invincible. He can do whatever he wants. He can kill whoever he wants, and he will never be caught. The police are not as smart as he is, and they will never catch up with him. So on January 21st, 1958, he goes to Carol's house, and he's refused entry by her mother, Velda, and her stepfather, Marion. So he ends up killing them with a shotgun. He ends up shooting them both in the head.
Oh,
and then he ends up, someone ends up stabbing and strangling Carol's 2-year-old half-sister, Betty Jean. Now, there is some disagreement between Charlie and Carol on Carol's involvement in the murders. She claims she was not a participant at all. She was forced to go along with him. Whereas he says, no, she was a willing participant. She also killed people. So her position on this day, the first day of the murders, is that she was not even in the house. She came home and her family was dead, and she was scared, and so she stayed. In either case, so these murders took place January 21st. She and Charlie stayed in the house until January 27th. Carol posted a note on the front door of the house saying, "Stay away, everybody's sick with the flu," to try and keep her older siblings and her grandmother out of the house. And they sat in the house with the dead bodies for 6 days. Yeah, until January 27th, at which point the grandmother just knew something was wrong. And so she called the police, and the couple fled before the police arrived. So on January 27th, they drive to the farm of Charlie's family friend, August Meyer, in Bennett, Nebraska. August is a man in his 70s. He was friends with Charlie's father. When they arrive, he lets them in the house, and Charlie kills both Meyer and his dog with shots to the head. Charlie and Carol then flee the house, and while they are racing away from the farmhouse, they end up crashing the car into the mud and abandoning it, and they start walking. So in the early hours of January 28th, they are picked up by 2 teenagers, 17-year-old Robert Jensen and 16-year-old Carol King, who stop and offer them a ride because they see them walking. Once Charlie and Carol are in the car, Charlie pulls out his gun and forces them to drive back to the farm in Bennett, and he takes them into an abandoned storm cellar. So Jensen, the boy, Robert Jensen, is immediately shot in the head and killed. Charlie then attempts to rape Carol King, but he's, surprise, surprise, can't get it up. And so then someone shoots and kills Carol King as well. Again, this is up for dispute. Charlie says that Carol, his girlfriend, Carol Fugate, shot the girl. Whereas she says, again, no, I didn't do anything. Charlie's the one that did it. So they get in Robert Jensen's car and they drive to Lincoln, Nebraska, to the home of wealthy industrialist C. Lauer Ward. They didn't know him. I'm not really sure why they targeted him, except that he was rich. So when they get there, the only people home are Ward's wife, Clara, and their maid, Lillian. They end up stabbing Clara and Lillian to death, and Charlie breaks the neck of the family dog.
Oh my god, what is his thing with dogs?
I know. When
That's
Miranda
what I was
telling
thinking
me about how they killed the dogs, I was like, oh my god, mine too.
Nina, cover your ears. Even though you're a
God.
rabbit.
I guess because the dog is like barking probably, and they don't want attention to be drawn.
Yeah.
So
Right.
after they do this, they sit in the house. They stay in the house and wait for Ward to come home. And when he does, they shoot him and kill him as well. So they steal his Packard and some jewelry, and they flee Nebraska. Because at this point, the police and the Nebraska Bureau of Investigation, the newspapers, they are all looking for these two. You know, they have put two and two together. They know that, I mean, they killed Carol's family, so they know who did it. They know who they're looking for.
It's so, like, Bonnie and Clyde-esque.
It's very Bonnie and Clyde-esque.
Well, yeah, and I was also thinking it kind of reminds me of 1922.
Which was probably based on...
Yeah,
I think it was based
probably.
on Bonnie
Yeah.
and Clyde with the son. Yeah, I love the
Yeah.
way that he
Yeah.
pulled that off. It's fucking weird.
Yep. So on January 29th, the next day, they realize that the Packard is way too high profile, so they need a new car. Obviously, the Packard was an extremely fancy car. And so as they're driving along, they find a traveling salesman named Merle Collison, who's sleeping in his car on the side of the
Oh,
road
poor Merle.
in Douglas, Wyoming. And they shoot and kill him.
Oh my god.
So they get into his Buick, but his Buick has a parking brake, which is something that was new technology at the time. So Charlie had never encountered a car with a parking brake. So I don't know if you guys have ever driven a stick shift
No.
before.
I have not.
Okay. But if you try and drive with the parking brake on, your car will stall out. And so, of course, this car was a stick. So as they're trying to drive away, the car keeps stalling out because they have the parking brake on. But again, he doesn't know how to disable the parking brake because he's never seen one. So he's trying to get the car going, and a passing motorist stops to see if he needs help. So Charlie gets out of the car and threatens this driver with a rifle. And the driver starts to basically try and wrestle the gun away from him.
Shit.
And luckily for that passing motorist, whose name I don't even know, a police deputy comes by, a sheriff's deputy, is driving by, and he pulls over, and Carol comes running out of the car screaming, "It's Stark weather, he's going to kill me." And Charlie gets in the passing motorist's car and drives off and leads the sheriff's department on this high-speed chase going over 100 miles an hour. And they end up shooting out his windshield. And some of the glass flies into him, and he's so scared that he's going to bleed to death that he pulls over and surrenders. So both Charlie and Carol end up being arrested for the murders. They are both extradited to Nebraska to face trial. Charlie decided not to fight his extradition because he thought that he would get the electric chair whether he was tried in Nebraska or Wyoming. He was actually wrong, as it turns out, because the governor of Wyoming at the time, was extremely anti-death penalty. So he probably would have stayed the execution. But, oh well. That's the breaks, I guess. So Carol's claim was that she was held hostage and wasn't a willing participant. When they're first arrested, Charlie does claim that she wasn't involved to protect her, but he does end up testifying at her trial that she committed some of the murders. The judge does not buy her defense that she was held hostage, and he ends up rejecting her defense. The judge basically believed that she had plenty of opportunities to get away and chose not to, or plenty of opportunities to get help and chose not to get help, especially by posting the note on the front of her family's house that basically she could have not put the note up and she would have known that somebody would have shown up eventually to help her. So Charlie ends up being sentenced to death in the electric chair, and he's executed on June 29th, 1959. Carol receives a life sentence in 1959, but she is paroled in 1976 after serving 17 and a half years. She has applied, she's still alive. She has applied, yeah, and she's not that old. I mean, she's only about 10 years older than my mom. She's only in her 70s. So she has multiple times applied for a pardon, and every time it's denied. So basically, nobody is buying that she wasn't involved, even now.
Yeah.
So she did do a radio interview in 1996, which is not online, so unfortunately I couldn't find it. But that is the only time she's ever talked about the murders. She worked as a janitor for a really long time. That was the only job that she could find because of her record. And then she did get remarried, and has some stepsons that have talked about her a couple of times. Just like little quotes about how she's a really nice person and all this kind of stuff. So, this case, obviously, since you guys both almost picked it, is pretty famous. It's inspired a lot of stuff, a lot of movies, including The Frighteners, which is a really good horror movie, if you guys haven't seen it, that Peter Jackson did before he made Lord of the Rings. Also, the Terrence Malick movie Badlands with Sissy Spacek and Martin Sheen, and the Quentin Tarantino movie Natural Born Killers with Woody Harrelson and Juliette Lewis.
Okay, yeah, that one I've heard.
And then it was also the inspiration for the songs Nebraska and Badlands by Bruce Springsteen. Which Nebraska is actually written from Charlie Starkweather's point of view, and Badlands is basically just about a kind of jaded character like him. This is a famous one. This is a big one. I mean, this was one of the first cases that really captured the nation's attention in terms of murder. I mean, people were invested in this case, and people were really invested in Charlie Starkweather. I mean, he was not a bad looking person. He definitely had that like kind of James Dean greaser look to him.
I was looking at pictures of him while you were talking, and that's the kind of thing, the kind of vibe I got.
Yeah,
from him.
and I mean, he's not a bad looking guy by any means, and so the media was kind of in love with this idea of just this young, I don't know, nihilistic guy, I guess, who just kind of snapped.
I'm really, really torn about the extent of her involvement.
Yes.
I've been trying to figure this out the whole time, and I've been going back and forth and back and forth.
I don't know. I mean, for what we know now about, like, Stockholm Syndrome and that kind of thing, I could see maybe where she wasn't a willing participant. But I also feel like she definitely was a willing participant.
I mean, they sat in her house with her dead family members for 6 days.
Yep.
I don't know.
To me, that's kind of the damning.
Yeah. Well, like, did he make her put the note on the door? I mean, he had a gun. He could have fucking killed her. She could have been like, this guy is
I don't know.
crazy.
I mean,
he might kill me too.
That's the question. That's the question.
But at the same time...
Did he force her to do it or not?
I mean, was she was 13 at the time of this whole thing?
She was 14 at the time the murders took place. She was 14.
14. That's also a factor for me.
It is, but he was only 18.
Yeah, but
he was also young.
I do feel like there's a huge difference between 14 and 18 in a lot of people, even though
there is.
Girls mature. And I'm not saying that, like, if she didn't do it, she shouldn't have been held accountable, but I just think that's a factor. Like, it being impressionable when you're that young. Like, you've got this older guy, you know, calling the shots and everything. Like the Joker to your Harley or whatever.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And I think it played against her that she doesn't look 13 or 14 in... If you look at pictures of her, like, at the trial, she does not look 14.
No.
Yeah.
She looks 18 or 19.
She does not.
I mean, she looks way older than she is. And I think that, perception-wise, that definitely would have played against her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely see that. That's why I can't decide. Like, I just keep arguing with myself about it.
I know, and you know, I go back, I'm the same way, I go back and forth. On one hand, the only testimony we have that she was a participant was his testimony.
Which,
and I believe he said... Well, and I believe he said at one point that if he was going to get the electric chair, he thought that she should get it too.
Exactly. It's like, well, of course he'd blame her to try to take some of the blame off of you so that you would at least both get a life sentence or something. Or, like, try to drag her down with you because you have that much of an ego.
Right.
I mean, duh.
Right.
But then there's the, like, when you said that she came out of the car and said, it's Starkweather, he's going to kill me, I feel like I got this, like, weird vibe that it was her last ditch, like, I can play the weak female card sort of thing.
Exactly. Especially...
Yes. That's how I felt about that, too.
Especially because there's no reason that she couldn't have done that at another time. It's not like other people weren't...
Yeah.
Like, when those teenagers pulled over to help them, there's no reason she couldn't have I don't know. I just feel like she did have chances to escape and didn't take them. And that almost says to me that it's because she wanted to be there.
Yeah, I could see that. But then there's, like, okay, so, I mean, it's not like they're in a big public place with a lot of people. There's two people who have no idea that this guy has, like, a fucking shotgun or something. And then there's your 14-year-old girlfriend. Maybe she's shutting up because she thinks maybe he won't kill these people if she doesn't do anything. And maybe it's self-preservation. So there's also that angle. It's, like, really frustrating to think about it.
It is. And there's the angle of her... Yeah. Her defense is that she basically wasn't there for any of the murders. So she's saying, oh, I wasn't even home when he killed my family. And then, I don't think I mentioned this, but when he takes the two teenagers into the storm cellar, she says, oh, I stayed in the car.
Oh, that's a bad
move,
then
why didn't you fucking go? Yeah. Why didn't you go someplace?
God.
Why did... I mean, I guess they were in the middle of nowhere, but, like, you had an option at that point to go somewhere else.
Also, and not like
even if you just, like, ran...
Right. Not like I'm a profiler or anything, but... I feel like he would force her to come with because he wants her to see his badassery or whatnot, whatever is going on in his head. Like, she's there to be a witness to his masculinity in a way.
Right.
Like, that's the first thing he did. That's what kicked it off is when he went to kill her family because they wouldn't let him in. And then it just... Yeah. I feel like there's no way she wasn't there for some, if not all, of his murders.
Exactly. I mean, it's just... Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. That's a tough one, whether she was involved or not.
Yeah.
So I guess I first heard about this crime. There was this made-for-TV movie called Murder in the Heartland that I saw on Lifetime when I was homesick, and it starred Tim Roth and Fairuza Balk, who most of you guys probably know as Nancy from The Craft.
Yeah,
she played Carol Ann.
Yes.
Love her.
So that's how I found out about this. But then, like I said, it's just inspired so many movies that actually I love, like Badlands, which is a great movie, and Natural Born Killers, which is a great movie.
That's kind of
and
like
The Frighteners, which is a great movie.
like one of those stock narratives, you know, like vigilante couple. It's just a thing.
Exactly.
No wonder it appealed so much.
And it actually said that when I was looking stuff up about it, that I know you guys brought up 1922.
Mm-hmm.
So it didn't bring up that specifically, but it did say that Stephen King, when he was, I don't know if he was a kid or if he was a teenager, he made a scrapbook of newspaper articles about Starkweather and Fugate. And he has used Starkweather, like, done, like, variations on his crimes in a lot of his work. Which, I mean, that sounds about right.
Okay.
But yeah, he said in an interview that he kept a scrapbook.
I love how obvious Stephen King's love for true crime is in his stories. Like,
I know.
It's just like a little, like, tip your hat to people who would who would get the references. It's amazing.
It just seems about right. When I saw that, I was like, yeah, seems about right.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget you can follow us on Twitter at QOTD Podcast, on Facebook at facebook.com/QOTD Podcast, Tumblr at queensofthedamnpodcast.tumblr.com, and YouTube at Queens of the Damn Podcast.
Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe on iTunes, and subscribe to us on Podbean, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and TuneIn Radio. You can also follow us on our blog, queensofthedamnpodcast.wordpress.com, to find bonus content and extra information on our episodes.
If you would like to donate to our show, you can find us at patreon.com/QOTD podcast, where you can receive special perks as a listener for becoming a monthly patron. If you would like to make a one-time donation, you can send it to QOTDpodcast@gmail.com on PayPal. Donations are greatly appreciated. They improve the quality of the show and go towards the production of future merch along with a new logo.
We'll see you next week.
I feel so differently about serial killers than I do about spree killers. Like, obviously, with serial killers, it's like, obviously I still disapprove, but I'm fascinated by your dark psychology. And with spree killers, I'm like, you little brat! Like, what is your problem? Yeah.